Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the August 21st, 2012 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It's my privilege to call this meeting to order, and I would like to invite you to pick up a copy of our agendas, as one of our fine residents is doing as we speak over on either side of the room. And you can follow along with our meeting tonight. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both on matters that are specifically on our agenda for action tonight, as well as an opportunity to comment on things of a general nature. As is customary, we begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this point in time, I would ask that everyone please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific. Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask our fine Deputy Village Clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Rankin. Here. Commissioner Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt.
Here.
Commissioner Durkin.
Here.
Commissioner Walbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Schnell.
Here.
Commissioner Mayor Tully.
He's here too.
Okay.
It's probably the last time since she did it.
That could be.
I think so.
Things change sometimes. You blink and you miss it.
Utah is a party foul.
All right, that brings us to item 3 on our agenda, which pertains to the adoption of minutes from prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes on tonight's agenda, and those are the minutes from our regular council meeting of August 14, 2012. Are there any changes, corrections, or comments on those minutes from any members of the council? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Those minutes are adopted as presented. I'm going to interrupt tonight's meeting for a very important announcement. I would like to read a proclamation at this point, and I just want to make sure that our recipient is here to receive it. Okay, thank you. You know, I'm getting older, I can't see that part anymore. So this is a proclamation. Whereas Guardians of the Ribbon, Inc., DBA Pink Heels Tour, that's doing business as, is a national non-profit organization consisting of firefighters, police officers, and leaders in the community whose sole purpose is raising awareness for the fight against cancer. And whereas the Pink Heels Tour began in September 2007 and encourages public safety professionals, local leaders, and citizens throughout the community to wear pink in honor of all women and to join forces to help them in their fight against cancer. And whereas the spirit of this campaign is to fight for those who have lost the ability to fight for themselves, asking for public support and raising understanding and awareness to all citizens. And whereas anything is possible when good people devote themselves to a cause that does so much good and benefits so many. And whereas the Cares Enough to Wear Pink campaign honors all women and recognizes the need to come together as a collective group and help with the fight against cancer, reminding future generations that people who are not affected by an illness can come together for those who are. Now, therefore, I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim August 23rd, 2012 as Cares Enough to Wear Pink Day in the Village of Downers Grove, dated this 21st day of August 2012. And I'm thrilled to invite one of the distinguished members of our fire service, Joel Nate, to come up, and I would like to present this proclamation to him and invite him to say a few words about this program. I'll come to you, don't worry about it. I'm going to get you where the cameras are.
I've got a face for radio.
Thank you. Thank you very much for rolling this. If you'd like to say a few words about it, you're more than welcome to. No obligation.
I'd love to. As my family will tell you, me and a microphone in a closed room are often a dangerous combination. I'll be brief and do my best to remain polite. Thank you, commissioners and mayor, for this proclamation. This means a lot to us. I became involved with the Pink Heels Tour 2 years ago. My daughter-in-law was a videographer for the local newspaper at the time, and she covered it as a story. I was here on duty in town the day that they were in the area where I lived, so I saw her report, and I knew it was something I wanted to be involved with. Last year, I went on tour, the Mother's Day tour, up and down the coast of California for 2 weeks. At the time, I was 52 years old, and it was the coolest thing I'd ever done in my life. I can still say that today. My first event was a home visit. A woman that had just finished her first round of chemotherapy. 3 pink fire engines pulled up with their lights and sirens going. 3 guys got out dressed up in pink turnout gear, and one of them, her son. We presented her with a dozen roses, and everybody gave her a hug, told her how glad we were that she was there. It was incredibly moving. We're fortunate that the tour is coming to Downers Grove this year on August 23rd. We've got a tour stop at Good Samaritan Hospital. Our local has partnered with the Cancer Care Center. We provide the wigs for the Good Samaritan Cancer Care Center. It's going to be an ongoing commitment of ours. So we've got a showing from 4 to 6 at Good Samaritan and from 7 to 9 at Cheeseburger in Paradise. I urge all of you to come up and visit us. Take a look at these pink fire engines that are signed by cancer survivors and in memory of cancer victims. And I challenge any of you to walk around one of these vehicles and read it and not be moved by some of the things that are written on there. I'm kind of a strong guy, and it's hard for me not to be reduced to tears by reading it. Cancer is something that's affected so many of us. I would be willing to bet 3/4 of the room knows someone closely that was lost to cancer or has fought cancer. This is a good organization. It's worthy of your support, and I encourage you to come out and see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your involvement in such a terrific organization, such a terrific cause, and for increasing awareness of it. I know that all of us, if we can, will try to participate in it later this week, so thanks again. And I saved my hot pink tie just for that occasion. I'll have that later. That brings us to item 4 on our agenda, which is the segment of the agenda where we entertain comments of a general nature with respect to matters that are not appearing on our formal agenda. So if there are any comments or questions of a general nature with respect to items not on tonight's agenda, now would be the opportunity to please come down to the podium, give us your name and address, and we would welcome hearing from you. Are there any comments of a general nature from anyone in the audience? It's the highlight of my meeting. I'm so disappointed. Hearing none, we'll move right on to our consent, to item 5, which are public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move to item 6, the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Mayor, just a point of order. We did have a commissioner request that item F be removed from the consent agenda, and by our council rules, that is automatically removed and will be considered separately.
Thank you for the reminder. I will re-ask, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as modified with the removal of item F, which would be 6F on the published agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any items on the consent agenda other than 6F? Any questions or comments from any members of the village council with respect to any items on the consent agenda other than 6F? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That portion of the consent agenda passes unanimously. Now, we'll turn back to item 6F. Do I have a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing an agreement with the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150, as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments with respect to members of the village council? Commissioner Newstead?
I just want to say that, every time we go through a contract negotiation and eventual settlement, it's always a good day. I think that when our staff and the management can get together to come up with not only employee rights, but management rights that are agreed upon and fair and negotiated in an open and fair manner, everybody wins. In this case, both sides were extremely cordial in the negotiations and had a great attitude about the meetings that they had with our village leadership. And I know that we wouldn't be able to really function as a village without these folks. So their hard work is the backbone of our village. And this contract really sets forth kind of the expectations for their working environment. It sets forth the expectations of their wages, of course, and their employee rights, as well as the rights that the management side has. So I'm in 100% support of this, and I think everybody involved, especially the village staff negotiating team, and then of course the employees and their negotiating team as well. So Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I'll just add that, yes, it's always preferable when you can reach agreement through an amicable process where both sides give and take and you come up with something that you can live with. And these, like some of the other union contracts that we've reached through collective bargaining recently, have been on very fair and favorable economic terms for the parties involved, and are well within our long-range financial plan and our expectations, which is good. So there's no surprises here, and I think overall, again, the process continues to work well in this regard in coming up with managing expectations and something that is well within reasonable financial parameters. And particularly this resolution is not dissimilar to the types of wage increases that we have for village employees that are not subject to collective bargaining. And as you mentioned, there are some other benefits to both sides from it, so I think it works out really well. If only this was always the case. Knock on wood, perhaps it is. So it's an imperfect process, but in this situation, I think it turned out pretty well. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Barnett?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll echo for a moment some of my colleagues have said, even though I'm not supporting this and asked to have it removed tonight. The village is nothing, though, without the good work of our team. And I want to make it clear that I appreciate the teamwork exhibited in these contract negotiations. It says a lot about our employees, as Commissioner Neustadt said, that they too want to find a point of compromise that respects our residents. In particular, I want to thank the members of the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150, for joining their colleagues in the fire department and VOC and trying to work through a sincere give-and-take process to get us to a mutually beneficial agreement. I think by and large it's a decent agreement. As the mayor said, it fits within certainly the planning that this group has done, and it's a good deal in that sense. However, it should come as no surprise to my colleagues and those that have been watching this body while I've been a part of it that I have a problem, a structural fundamental problem, and times remain difficult. Our total revenues and expenditures are similar to that of years ago. They're not certainly growing. And our employees work mightily every day to provide better service while reducing costs. That's a good thing. More often than not, they succeed. But we also know all around us the uncertainty that's there. We know the discussions in Springfield that occur on a daily basis. We know cost shifts to local governments are real possibilities. As we talked about during the stormwater process, state and federal mandates just keep coming. There's no end in sight. And frankly, our private sector employee environment is still largely struggling and suffering. So the future is far from certain. It's not even remotely comfortable from where I sit, nor assuring. And so thus I continue to be unable to support a contract that's structured in such a way that the only sure way out for the village, should something fall off a cliff or times get really tough, is layoffs. That just doesn't sit well with me. I don't want to lay anybody off. We did that. We saw it several years ago at the police department. I hate the idea of a contract that essentially is structured to almost cause that down the road. And so because of that, I won't be supporting this contract, and but I appreciate the work that's gone into it and want to make sure our employees recognize I appreciate them as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the council with respect to 6F? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The matter passes 6-1. That brings us to the end of our consent agenda. Brings us to our active agenda. Item 7. We have several items under our active agenda. First, 7A. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance adopting a stormwater utility ordinance and amend the water utility provisions as presented?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance adopting a stormwater utility ordinance and amending water utility provisions as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from members of the village council with respect to this item? Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Some may recall that I was the only one who voted against going ahead with the creation of the utility for several reasons, and last week I mentioned that. You can go back and review those minutes and those podcasts. Also last week, there was agreement up here that staff actually presented a plan that was in line with council, with exactly what the council requested. And I do agree that we do need a regular source of funding for stormwater for all the work that we do need to do. And I think we all agree on that. My problem is moving away from property taxes to a fee system that adds bureaucracy, even a small one, and I believe in the end will go to the detriment of the property tax-paying public. Property taxpayers will lose the deduction because fees are not tax deductible. Like it or not, it is a fact that people pay more attention to their tax bill than their fees. Rises in property taxes draw attention, as do reductions, but fees are generally raised with much less fanfare, and it's easier to raise fees than taxes, but both hit the pocketbook equally. People will see their property taxes reduced, but as fees rise, they will wonder why they have less money in their pocket at the end of the year. For example, the press published property tax deduction, but didn't really stress that there'll be an appropriate increase in fees, and that plan already calls for 11% increases every year. After 7 years up here, and after a decade of watching the budget process, after looking at comparables with other municipalities, which is something we typically do, we'll see a drop in taxes and as they're moved to a fee structure. I believe that over time, the property taxes will again migrate back to whatever the then comparables are. So, and then with the loss of institutional memory in future councils, we'll bring taxes back, and then you'll have those taxes plus the additional fees. The concept is moving revenue away from taxes to a fee will increase the pool of fee payers. And that seems to be a great argument, and it's a very tempting argument, one that I considered very carefully. But then you start looking at it, and before we even begin, the opportunities for credits for the added pool diminishes the pool. Every dollar not paid by the larger pool is put back on the original taxpayer base. So, and those people had already given up their tax deductions. The opportunities for credits on the residential side are much less, and many are just one time. So, you know, some things to consider: how long before some corporation and others get waivers from fees in order to attract and retain business. Schools, for example, are given money to teach what one would already expect a school to teach regarding environment and pollution. But they're going to get money for that. Some in the pool, like the Park District, may be exempt. Fair or not, the pool is already made smaller. And there's other examples of things that make that fee-paying pool smaller and put it back on the original taxpayer base. I've seen variances and waivers over the years. Other tax entities have been given great latitude because they're tax-paying bodies. So the village taxpayers pay what other entities continue with, while other entities continue with their policies and really don't change their behavior. And that's not a way to affect change in the other entities. All it takes is 4 votes to waive a fee, give an exemption, or modify a rule. Every dollar removed from the fee pool is put back on the original taxpayer base. The village council cannot exempt individuals or entities from property taxes, but it takes only 4 votes to modify the fees or exclude individuals or entities. So the choice for me was very close, it was, and I considered it carefully. And I was almost sold on the utility, but seeing the workings of council and budgeting over the years, I'm not convinced that this is really in the best interest of the taxpayers, so I will not be supporting the utility. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schnell?
Just a couple of comments. This has been a very long process. It started back in the early 2000s, and it has been a very open process, a very engaged process with the public. We, as a council and as staff, have tried to give information out so residents understand that one way or the other you have to pay for stormwater. In this particular case, it's almost a wash. And for many of us, there will actually be a reduction in the amounts that we pay. You can go on our website and put in your address to find out exactly what it will cost you and what your savings may be. I think it's very important, from my perspective, it's very important from September through the first bills in January, that residents become more engaged and that they educate themselves as to exactly what this is, how it's going to work, what the bills are going to look like, so that we have as many people as possible understanding the system. There's still going to be questions, and we all know that. But the more engaged you are and the more information you have, the better it will be once you get your first bill. And staff is going to be doing all sorts of different types of communication to engage our residents so that they have a better understanding of what the stormwater utility is going to mean to them. When Commissioner Tully and I actually started out this process, I think in 2003, I was probably one of the 2001? Is that, oh gosh. Okay, 2001, I was one of the strongest opponents to a stormwater utility, I think, on that particular committee. Through education and through a lot of work on the part of everyone, it really has become clear to me that we have to do something. The master plan has shown us that there's a tremendous amount of need in this community, and we have to have a way to pay for it. And this appears to be the most sensible way of doing that, because from my perspective at least, we are engaging everyone, not just our residents, but we're engaging the Park District and churches and a whole group of people who really are responsible for stormwater, as well as the people who live here. So I will be in support of this, because I think staff has really done a tremendous job, and we're very fortunate to have a staff that could actually do a tremendous amount of work in a very short period of time. So, as I said, I encourage every resident in this community to become as knowledgeable as possible between now and January 1.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Newstadt.
Thank you, Mayor. I will also be in support of this. I think one of the comments that Commissioner Waldeck made is may have happened in the past about council members forgetting or changing. Yes, we can change anything we want next week. However, the village's long-range financial plan, the budgeting, and the processes in place for the last few years are going to be incumbent on the stormwater utility and its revenue. And the plan is in place, the plan has been working, and now the long-range financial plan and the budgeting process will incorporate the new stormwater utility. So it isn't just as easy as 4 votes. While it is technically a motion, a second, and 2 other people to vote for it, it takes a lot more than that, because it affects the entire organization's financial position. So I think that the hard work that's gone into this decision tonight really has taken place over a number of years, and I'm ready to go forward with it. I think our staff has done an excellent job in getting us to the point where we can look at these ordinances and be ready to say yes and move forward. So I'll be in full support of it, and look forward to, along with Commissioner Schnell, helping our residents find their way and understand what's going to be happening. And as we heard last week, we'll be using every means possible to educate and inform and get the word out about this new creative utility in our village. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Reckon?
Excuse me, months ago I voted in favor of staff moving forward with the creation of the stormwater utility. I think staff has done a great job in the overwhelming task that was put ahead of them. I did have a few concerns that were addressed, and so I will be supporting this moving forward. Just like all new things, there's an aversion to change, and there will be a learning curve as our residents and businesses get used to this new system of paying for their stormwater. Along with fix my streets, prevent my yard and basement from flooding was one of the biggest comments I hear from people in the public. I think it's important to have a dedicated revenue stream, which primary purpose is for stormwater. So, as I said, I will be supporting this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to put some numbers to this just to remind everybody. We're talking about $840 a month on a household, typical household, and that sounds like a small number. But that's $100 a year. And while certainly this, as has been alluded to, this body has the authority to change things down the road, the anticipation at this point is 15% annual increases for a decade plus. And that starts to be big money. You know, it starts to be real money at that point. I've shared some of the same concerns about the tax deductibility aspect of this. And in not too long down the road, you're talking about $300 or more per household. You're talking about $6.5 million of revenue. That's money that I think we've all agreed we need, and we've struggled with figuring out how to get. But that tax deductibility to me is just a huge deal. We are essentially, in my mind, allowing, you know, $1.5 million in year 1, $2 million by the time you get out to year 15 and the thing's fully mature of Downers Grove resident income to be pushed away to the federal government to fund, mandates back down to us, if you will. I think it's kind of a bad circle, and I'm not, as I said last week, comfortable with this. In 2008, the council raised taxes for stormwater. Stormwater is a huge deal. It has been talked about for the better part of a decade. 2006, I think, is when we really started planning. 2008, we told everybody we were going to raise taxes. It was prior to this council, certainly. And that was really clear, really transparent, really understood, I think, by everyone. This, to me, I worry that in short order, this will be less clear and less understood. And yet it's the same kind of money. It's not a question of priorities, I don't think. I think Commissioner Rankin's right. Our community has said fix stormwater, and we're making good progress towards doing that. This addresses the idea of trying to maintain some of those improvements, and certainly that's important. But when we tell everybody we're going to do that, and then we take away that tax deduction, I think that's more pain than we need to inject into our residents' lives. Please know that as I'm sitting here talking about this, I'm not critical of the planning that's gone on for the last decade. I'm not critical of the 2006 master plan. I'm not critical of the work that our staff and MFSG have done. I think it's been good work that proves we've got a real need and proves we've got to be serious about addressing it. I'm just concerned that this isn't the right vehicle to do so. I was trying to reflect back on the discussions to this point, as well as some of the decisions made by the councils that I've been part of. And there's been some back and forth dialogue, and I've referred to this occasionally as a tax, and I know it's not technically. I've been well schooled by my colleagues who know better in the definitions, but I think that's still the best way to describe it. Back in 2009, we had some really challenging budget discussions. I mean, we had knockdown, drag out, room full of people kind of conversations over $25 here on a tax bill or $5 there. We had examples of small things, way less than this kind of money, that really got people's backs up. And what I'm afraid of is that despite our best efforts, we're not going to hear about this until the people get their first bills. And that's unsettling to me. The total amount of money that we saved is somewhere around $4.5 million through all those cuts that got everybody upset. We're talking about $6.5 million here. It's a big deal. It's money that's needed, but I'm not sure this is the path. One thing I said back then, and I want to just repeat it now, because I think it still is appropriate. 2009, when we were struggling, I said we shouldn't be raising non-property taxes and fees and then pretending we've somehow been noble. We can't tell a homeowner, senior or otherwise, to turn their lights off a little earlier, turn the heat down, turn the AC off, flush less often, and then suggest somehow we're doing them a favor by raising utility fees down the road. That to me still rings true with this, and not because we don't need to do this work. We do. I've said that probably too many times, but I want to keep saying it because forward, I believe this is going to pass tonight, and I'm assuming that we're all going to be on board with trying to make this work. But those tax deductibility issues are just a big deal that I can't seem to get past. We sure can't tell folks to have it rain on their property a little less any more than we can tell them to do those other things. So in the end, I hope I'm wrong. You don't hear me say that very often, but I hope our businesses and residents appreciate the efforts put in thus far. I hope they appreciate the purpose of this utility, and I hope, frankly, that it works out well. I'd love to be wrong about this, but for tonight, I remain in a position where I'm going to be voting no.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, might as well go.
Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah. So if we make if we change the motion to be a property tax instead of a utility fee, would you and Barnett and Commissioner Waldeck be on board?
We have to pick a number.
So that's your whole holdup, is because it's not a property tax, it's being handled as a fee.
Correct.
So maybe we're doing an injustice by not changing it to a fee, or from a fee to the property tax. My 3 cents on this is we definitely have a need. That we do have. What I like about it is that it creates a revenue stream dedicated to the bonds that we would issue for stormwater. It will help us with our ratings with S&P and Moody's in the long run. It is a reduction in the total fee, if you want to call it that, or the property tax. It's a reduction in the property tax of the properties that I looked at. So there is a reduction there. But more importantly, I know that when we talked about this for a long period of time, we talked about having this thing increase of 150% over 10 years. But I want to remind everyone, this 15%, if that's what staff or the council decides in years to come, that that's what we're going to do, it has to be voted on. So, I mean, there is going to be room for discussion if it's going to be increased by 15%, 5%, or maybe no increase at all. We don't know. We have found out, after we did all that extensive engineering research, that the total, or what we thought was a huge stormwater mess, really wasn't as large as we thought it was, because of the amount of projects that we were able to do that fixed most of the problems, even though there's still some out there. So I support this. I too have a concern with it not being on the property tax bill. But if that was the case, and we were so overall collectively concerned about it, not of losing that property tax, then why aren't we having our garbage service on the property tax bill? Because that's a lot of money too, depending on how large your family is and how many containers you have. So with that, I will be supporting this. And if we as a council decide to make this a property tax issue again, I'll support it there as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schnell?
Can I just make
Sure.
actually two comments? One, I think one of the pluses of a utility is the fact that it spreads the cost among the entire community. People who actually are generating the biggest runoff are the ones that will be paying the largest fees. The average resident is not the customer, if you want to call it that really is generating the most runoff. It's much more of the larger commercial where there are lots of blacktop and things like that. So from a resident point of view, it's really spreading the cost of all of the stormwater projects in the stormwater master plan across a much broader base in the community. So in actuality, if it was only on property tax, our residents would be paying more simply because many of the entities that are now covered by the stormwater utility are not covered by property taxes. So from my perspective, it's much fairer. I'm having a hard time with some of this because as we talked about the utility and the creation of the utility, at one point in time, there was actually a idea about splitting it between property taxes and a utility fee. And somehow, which I was totally in favor of at the time, but somehow at least 4 council members said that they wanted it all put on a fee because they thought that was better. And I'm having a hard time, I guess, getting to the point where that was not good then, but now it's not good when we're putting it all in fees. And I will vote for this, but I think we need to talk things out better in the beginning, so I think we all understand what our insights are, because if I remember that discussion, some of what we're hearing it doesn't make sense. So anyway, I will pay for it. I will pay for it. I will pay for it too. I will pay for it, but I will support it, and I will support it all being in fees simply because that's what's before us today. But it is fair to everyone and all our residents because it is spread over a much larger group of the population in town.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, this has been a long process, there's no question about it, and one that I think deserves at least some deliberative summation of where we were and how we got here. Because, believe it or not, despite the amount of time and the frequency with which we have discussed this topic, I guarantee you there are those who are just tuning in now. In fact, I know that there are some relatively newly assigned members of the press that are in the audience here tonight that may not have heard these conversations in the past, so please bear with me. This has been a very deliberative process, and certainly 10 years ago, we did not invoke this concept with the idea that we've got to have a stormwater utility in Downers Grove. The driving force was the need to maintain our stormwater infrastructure and comply with Phase 2 of the Federal Clean Water Act, an unfunded mandate, but that's another conversation for another time. And the question was, how are the requirements of Phase 2 of the Clean Water Act going to be paid for, in addition to all the other requirements that the municipality has in maintaining its stormwater infrastructure, clean water quality, et cetera, et cetera. These things cost money, not to mention the flooding issues that we have that grew in importance in later years and resulted in a very loud cry from our residents to do something about stormwater. Stormwater is expensive. You can't decide overnight to go into the stormwater business. You have to deal with professionals, you have to follow rules. There's an entire county ordinance that pertains to nothing but stormwater. It is an expensive business, and it is our obligation to take care of it, and we are not provided with outside funds, much to speak of, to deal with it. So, there is unanimous support for the concept of doing something, and it is universally understood that it will cost a significant amount of money to do something about it. Having decided to not eliminate some other function of the village in order to pay for stormwater, this council in its long-range financial plan has decided to come up with a source of funding for stormwater management and infrastructure maintenance. Are there more than one way? Is there more than one way, excuse me, to pay for stormwater costs? Absolutely. We could simply do what we've always done, which is to pay for it through property taxes. That would be easy. As Commissioner Barnett mentioned in response to Commissioner Durkin's comment, we could come up with a number. And staff could plot it over the next 10, 15, 20 years, and we could tell every person in this room how much more you're going to pay in property taxes over the next 10, 15, 20 years for stormwater. That's easy. And yes, we'd have to vote on that every year too, and long-range financial planning, and there would be people in the audience who would not appreciate the fact that their property taxes were increasing due to stormwater maintenance. But there's another way to do it, and that's the concept of a stormwater utility. And having discussed it and thought about it and interacted with the community about it for a decade, I have been convinced that it is a better alternative to funding stormwater maintenance and infrastructure through property taxes. And I've come to that conclusion principally for 5 reasons. Number one, a stormwater utility is a more logical way to raise funds for stormwater than property taxes. Why? Well, as Commissioner Durkin suggested, we could put a lot of things in the property tax bill. Think about the water that the village of Downers Grove provides to its residents and to its businesses. If we were to decide to charge you based on the size of your lot for what you paid for water, you would think that would be ridiculous. And why would you think it was ridiculous? Because you would ask the question, what does the size of my lot or the value of my property have to do with my water consumption? The answer, nothing whatsoever, or very little. Turn that around in reverse. It's the same logic with respect to a stormwater utility. What does the value of a property have to do with the amount of stormwater runoff that it generates? Answer, very little. This is very similar in concept. So this is a more logical way to go about raising funds for stormwater maintenance. It's, on a related note, number 2, more equitable. And what I mean by that, it's more fair. It's more equitable because, as Commissioner Schnell mentioned, this truly spreads out the cost of stormwater throughout the entire community much more closely in terms of who contributes to the runoff. And that's why there is contemplated by this proposal, almost $2.5 million reduction in the property tax levy, because the cost of stormwater is going to be shifted from the property tax levy to a stormwater fee. And Commissioner Barnett's right, whether you call it a tax or a fee or something else, it does ultimately come down to the same thing, it's a payment. We recognize that. It's more equitable in that you are charged a fee that is in relation to the amount of stormwater that is runoff that is generated by the parcel in question. So it's, in some respects, the flip side of your water consumption. The more you consume, the more you pay. With stormwater, the more runoff you generate, the different and the higher the fee that is paid. The stormwater fee, as was mentioned, is not a tax from a legal perspective, and therefore it is paid by all those who generate runoff, subject to the parameters of the ordinance and adjustments that I'll come to in a moment. So it is spread out more broadly, and in that way also more equitable and more egalitarian in nature. This is important because the property tax way of funding stormwater, as we demonstrated in slides that I won't ask village staff to pull out again, demonstrate that traditionally, through a property tax system only, there was a disproportionate amount of the burden of stormwater that was being paid for by a smaller segment of the community. This balances out more, where there's a more proportional sharing of the burden. No system is perfect, but this is more proportionate than using property taxes only. Reason number 3, a stormwater utility is more sustainable than property taxes. Yes, there is some additional bureaucracy that is created, but that actually has, and I hate to use the word benefit and bureaucracy in the same breath because that is rarely ever the case, but it is a more sustainable funding of infrastructure because you have a mechanism that is developed and designed solely for one purpose, and that is to measure, raise, and fund the cost of stormwater maintenance and infrastructure. Property tax system right now doesn't do that. And this leads to the 4th reason why I think a stormwater utility is a better alternative. And that is, and I hate to use this word as well because it's been used to death, it's more transparent. The very fact that people will flip out when they get their first bill is significant in the fact that they will be probably seeing for the first time ever the cost of stormwater broken out on a line item on a bill. That's never happened before. I challenge you right now to go get your property tax bill and tell me what portion of it pertains to the maintenance of stormwater, infrastructure, and clean water obligations. The answer is you won't find it. So yes, now residents will see for the first time the actual amount that they're paying for this particular function of the village. And not only will they be more educated, but they will be able and empowered to hold their government more accountable for how those funds are managed. So in that respect, this system is more transparent than using property taxes or paying for it from the general fund, which good luck trying to figure that out. I think only Commissioner Rankin really understands that up here. I'm kidding, everybody understands it. The last reason, the 5th reason, is that there is a benefit to a stormwater utility in that it actually promotes awareness and best practices when it comes to stormwater generally. Paying a property tax and spending some money that goes off into a black hole that no one knows what it's used for or why is not only something that doesn't promote an awareness of how to better manage stormwater and support the goals of the Clean Water Act, but if you know that you can have credits and you know that you're being charged based on the amount of runoff that is generated from the property, you're going to become more aware of runoff and how runoff can be curtailed. And in fact, the stormwater utility, and this also ties back into the concept of being more equitable, has built into it the concept of credits, so that to some extent you can manage the amount that you pay in a fee by reducing the runoff up to an extent from your property. That very fact will promote awareness and I guarantee you, more than the current system, promote best practice in terms of better stormwater management, not just at a village level, but at an individual level as well. Because you now know that by taking measures to adjust stormwater runoff, you're going to be more inclined to understand it and to take steps to do so, which benefits the entire community. Those are the 5 principal reasons why I have become convinced, and it took 10 years, that this is a better alternative. But again, it's not the only alternative. And this is an alternative that does, yes, have drawbacks. And the drawback that is probably the one that stands out the most has been described by both Commissioner Waldeck and Commissioner Barnett, and that is because it is legally a fee and not a tax. It is currently, under our current tax system, mind you, that can change as well. Under our current tax system, you cannot deduct this from your income taxes. Now, that's a fact, and yes, that is a drawback, and we don't have an answer for that because it is just a reality. Now, what the incremental detriment is from the amount that you couldn't deduct under a stormwater utility that you could deduct if it was on the property taxes, in my opinion, is nominal at best and does not outweigh the benefits of this program. But yes, it is a fact. But again, the tax system could change such that that eliminates that entire issue altogether anyway. So I don't think we can count on a static state of affairs going forward in terms of tax deductibility. But even there, it is, in my opinion, a nominal cost to pay in the grand scheme of things. As has been pointed out, if we don't do the stormwater utility, then we're back to a funding gap, and that funding gap would have to be made up somehow. And again, yes, we could pick a number and raise the property taxes, but I guarantee you that would be met with a equally tepid response from our constituents. This program that has been proposed is one that is tailored to Downers Grove. This isn't some stormwater utility that we bolted on to our village that was just borrowed lock, stock, and barrel from someplace else. Our village staff and a number of other people have spent a tremendous amount of time and effort in designing a system that is ideally suitable to Downers Grove. And I applaud their efforts for everything that they've done. It is a reasonable application of the stormwater utility concept to fit the particulars of the village of Downers Grove. As Commissioner Rankin mentioned, yes, it is something new. And anytime you do something new, it's a little scary. Will there be bumps in the road? You betcha. I couldn't agree more with Commissioner Barnett that we won't really get the public reaction to this until the first bills go out in January, because that's when most people will actually pay attention to it. And there will be, I guarantee you, things that we will tweak over time in terms of both budget, as Commissioner Durkin mentioned, and the operational aspects. So as we learn, and as we see how this works in the field, we will make adjustments. And as Commissioner Durkin mentioned, if the projections in terms of finance turn out that we don't need to make the increases for whatever reason that are currently projected, I would hope that future councils would not make those increases. But again, those will be very transparent, and they will be broken out and specific to stormwater. And once again, I believe that our constituents will be more empowered to hold this and future councils accountable for those increases than they currently are under a property tax only system. Commissioner Schnell points out what overlays all of this is that education will be absolutely key. Anytime the village does anything new or different, educating our constituents is indispensable. Whether it's even something like the municipal electrical aggregation program that is now available, which even though it universally will save people money, it still is something that many residents who are finding out are simply averse to because it's something different, it's new. And most of all, it's something that's being offered by their local government, so therefore, by definition, it must be bad. Education is absolutely critical. And there will be bumps in the road as we go forward. There will certainly be, I think the term was borderline managed chaos when the first bills hit, and I know our staff is capable as any of handling that. But I think over time, I'm confident that future councils will look back and see this as a wise decision that was made for the benefit of future generations. So that's all I have, and if you can't guess from my comments, I will be in favor of this particular proposal. Any other questions or comments from any members of the council? Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin.
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin.
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett.
Nay.
Commissioner Newstead.
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Nay.
Mayor Tully.
Aye. Matter passes 5-2. Brings us to item 7B on our agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance proposing the establishment of a special service area, number 4, Green Acres subdivision as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from any members of the village council with respect to this item? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin.
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin.
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead.
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell.
Aye.
Mayor Tully.
Aye, that matter passes unanimously. Next, item 7C, do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending general penalties for ordinance violations, penalties for miscellaneous offenses, and general sentencing for ordinance violations as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Boy, does that sound ominous. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience? Any questions or comments from any members of the village council on this item? Commissioner Waldeck.
Not just to this item, but when we, just because there's no comments out here, we workshop this, and any questions and discussion, you can check last week, or you can check the minutes or the responses to council questions. So don't take silence as a non-interest. And that's just a point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Well said. Any other comments from members of the council? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter also passes unanimously. That brings us to item 7D as in David. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending the Ogden Avenue Site Improvement Strategy, also known as OASIS program?
Mayor, I move to adopt an ordinance adopting an amendment to the Ogden Avenue Site Improvement Strategy Program as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from any members of the village council? Commissioner Barnett?
Thank you, Mayor.
Wasn't sure if that was a hand or not.
That was a hand. I wanted to thank Commissioner Rankin, who I think was kind of pressing for some of this compromise wording relative to the sign improvement issue. That remains one that I think is a challenge for some of us, but I think we've gotten to a spot where we can proceed and have an ordinance that continues to kind of evolve, which is what they tend to do. So I appreciate that effort, and we'll be supporting this tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck?
Thank you, Mayor. As everyone should know, I have not been a fan of using taxpayer dollars to fund sign-only applications under this program. Just a reminder that we are talking about tax dollars. If the TIF should come up short, taxpayers are on the hook. If there's an excess, the taxpayers will get the money back through their various entities. So we are talking definitely about tax dollars. And I think this is more of a process thing than an issue, but should anyone have watched or heard the previous discussion about a month ago, there was one commissioner who supported sign-only applications. Another council member did not support sign-only, but thought we should ease up on the requirements. The requirements stated in the last discussion, the workshop, was that only outstanding applications, that means they had to have three of the, I believe it was 3 of the 4 items requested in order to qualify for sign money. And 5 of the council members up here had no problem with that. I was a bit surprised when I opened the agenda packet online Friday to find out that that was modified. And I went back and I looked over the podcast, or the broadcast actually, and there was no indication that there would be the change that's being proposed for sign money. I did not see for head nods. Yeah, well, like I said, there was one for sign-only money. The other was merely a suggestion, and there were no head nods or voice votes or indications that there should be a change. And then when you open it a few weeks later, there's this change there, this modification. And I have a problem with that process, because that modification should have been discussed, talked about in public, as it was, you know, however this came about. I really don't know how this came about. I'm told that there were head nods. I saw no head nods. We got a problem with process. You know, maybe there were discussions with various commissioners offline. I don't know. So, you know, I'm not a my way or the highway type person, although sometimes it might seem like it. But, you know, this modification I can live with. You know, I would have preferred what I actually thought was going to be proposed off the last meeting. And I would have been more happy with that one. I'm less happy with this, but I can still support it. But anyway, I just have a problem with and that was a question I asked. You'll see it in the questions if you look it up. I was the one that asked about cite examples of how this changed. I don't know what it is about the process that things just magically change over a few weeks' time. That's what I have. I'll support this, and hopefully, I don't know if the village manager wants to comment at all. I did not see head nods. I definitely did not hear anything off that meeting to recommend a change.
Well, Commissioner, I will just weigh in, you know, having sat here. I know that we had multiple meetings and had vigorous debate on the topic, because what was originally proposed, I recall there was pushback on, and requests from Commissioner Rankin and others to make some changes. We had input from the audience, we've had input from organizations outside of this council. I think we just talked about it left and right, so I don't think the fact that there was a change should come as a surprise to anyone. It may be that this particular way that it landed on the agenda, I guess you could say that maybe that wasn't what you were anticipating, but I can't imagine how anyone, having been at the last several meetings, could think that there wasn't some change afoot, given the discord, I would say discord, but given the vigorous discussion of the topic in terms of whether or not there would be sign only at all, or whether there had to be super criteria for sign funding. I know that I provided my input. Did we have a discussion up here? I know that we had prior discussions up here and everyone voiced their concerns. So I don't know if something magically happened. I think it was probably staff doing the best they could to try to pull together disparate views into something that, in their view, reflected the composite of what everyone was saying. If this is not, what's before us is not acceptable to anyone, then that's why we're here discussing it. We can vote on it, we can make amendments, we can table things, we can do a lot of stuff. So I just want to underscore that the process isn't concluded. In fact, we're in the moment right now. The process is ongoing. There are at least 3 or 4 things that you could do right now if there was something before you that you didn't like. So while that may be the case, I don't want to suggest to anyone that there was some kind of inordinate or unsavory lack of process.
If I may.
Absolutely.
If you watch the podcast, there were 5 people that said, great, we like this program the way it is. I'm glad, I don't approve the sign only, and they would have liked it. And you would interpret it as being either a 7-0 or at worst a 5-2 because of the signs. Everybody was happy with the signs except for 2 council members. And that was when it was the requirement was outstanding, 3 of the 4. We reduced that, and there was no discussion on that reduction. And it's different when staff comes up with the agenda and the packet and wording of things. It sets a bar, and the bar was actually lowered. And if anybody was watching that at the last meeting, they would have got the impression that there was no direction from council to make that change, and the change was made. And I think that we either have to do away with this head nodding stuff and actually have some sort of a voice indication of when we change things. Otherwise, we get into this. I saw 4 head nods. Well, I saw 3 head nods. No, there were no head nods. And there was definitely nothing verbal at the last meeting that would have indicated that this change was coming up.
I may be mistaken, and I'll go back and look at the minutes, and I'll go back and look at the meetings, but I have a distinct recollection of sitting here and hearing Manager Fielman asking, I think I've heard from the council, not nodding, but because I'm not a fan of head nodding either, I would much prefer that people actually put their views on the record so that everyone can see and hear them. So I'm with you on that one, which is why I don't recall it being head nods. And again, I could be mistaken. I'll go back and look at the transcript.
The camera was focused on you when you made a proposal to ease up on the pedal, I believe was the wording, if I recall.
I would use something far more colorful than that. That couldn't have been me.
Whatever it was, the camera was directed on you. So physically,
first of all,
that's my point. I think we need to get away from this head nod, nonverbal process.
Understood. Okay. And I think that's a statement that I understand and I appreciate. In this particular instance, I was not aware that we hadn't all expressed ourselves in some way, and I don't want to. I don't think it would be fair to say that staff did anything behind the scenes or untoward. I think they were legitimately trying to pull together into a composite a series of disparate views on a topic that were somewhat overlapping, somewhat related, but not necessarily consistent, and trying to present a cohesive package to us for further discussion and debate. If we wanted to discuss and debate this further, again, we haven't voted on it yet. There are procedural options that are available, which then leads me on the next question, and I understand you were making a point about process. I get that. The next question is there an issue with respect to the ordinance as presented such that it would prohibit you from voting on it or voting on it in favor? I thought I heard you say you could live with it and you'd be okay with it. And I'm not going to let you nod your head, I want to hear you say.
I would have preferred keeping it in the original, which would have required outstanding project applications.
Okay.
That's what I would have preferred if, but what's before us as presented is a lower
Yes.
the bar version.
Yes.
And if anybody would like to voice the fact that they would also like to see it changed, we could have that discussion. If they
Sure.
would prefer not to have that discussion, then we'll just continue to vote the way it is. And I said I could live with this.
Because we could approach it several ways. We could vote on it as is presented before us. We have a motion and a second on the table. If there are those who are against this rendition of the ordinance, they can vote against it. If anyone feels that they want to change it or propose other revisions to it, there's a vehicle by which that can be done.
Right.
Could I chime in for a minute?
Absolutely not. Yes, of course.
Okay,
you can.
so after the last meeting, I was, or not the last meeting, but the meeting we talked about it, I talked to Manager Fieldman and said, you know, do you think there's any room for compromise? And he said, I think that I heard from the mayor that there may be room for compromise. I called separately a few of my colleagues, is there any room for compromise? They indicated there was room for compromise, so that might be it. I don't think there's anything wrong with calling a colleague and ask them if they would be interested in compromise. And I think that might be the result of the change, so. Is that a?
Sure, certainly sometimes
Proper for me to
reading the
share?
direction of a council in a workshop setting can be more art than science. And one of the ways we augment
Being way
that,
too polite.
one of the ways we augment that is through one-on-one conversations with the council members every week, and then about every once a month we get together and go through an extensive conversation. So the staff recommendation on this, or what's reflected here, is a combination of the meeting, which is where we thought we got the direction, followed up by confirmation, phone calls, and face-to-face meetings. Is there a way to improve the process? I'm sure there's many ways we could always get better. However, I think the real issue here is the essence of the ordinance. Does the council like what's presented here, or would they like to change it? So we're happy to do anything the council would like to do on this issue.
Any other comments? There's a motion and a second on the table. Are there any other comments or proposals?
On the motion, correct?
I'm sorry?
On the motion.
On the motion that's pending, on the table, yes. Commissioner Schnell?
I think it's an improvement over what was there before, and my impression is that it will pass, so let's give it some time, and if it doesn't seem to do what we want it to do, then we can always come back and make revisions to it. But
Yes.
I think at this point in time, ideally, I think probably what Commissioner Waldeck was talking about may have been better. You know, it was more stringent, but yet would it have gotten us to what we wanted to? I don't know. This is what is before us. This was a compromise that was worked out between the manager and the seven of us. So I think it's worth giving it a shot to see if it works, and if it doesn't, we can come back and say it's not working and we'd like to see a revision to it. And so I'm willing to go and try that and see what happens.
Thank you. Let me come at this from a slightly different direction. I want to thank everyone who's involved in the OASIS program, because this is, I think, been a very successful program that has supported the goal of enhancing the aesthetics and to somewhat of a lesser degree economic development along the Ogden Avenue corridor, consistent with the Ogden Avenue Master Plan. For those who may be hearing this for the first time, there was an Ogden Avenue Master Plan that was developed back in the late 90s. There is a tax increment financing district that exists along a good portion of Ogden Avenue as it runs through Downers Grove. That creates a certain pool of funds that the goal of which is for the improvement and economic development of that corridor. We have an economic development corporation whose goal is to, one of the goals of which is to pursue that. Obviously, this is of great concern as well to our Chamber of Commerce, and we're fortunate to have members of both those organizations work with village staff and members of the public on this OASIS program, which is putting to good use the funds that exist within that TIF fund. And we've had some really good successes from it. There are always discussions ongoing about what is the best, most effective, and most long-reaching way to utilize those resources consistent with the Ogden Avenue Master Plan, the Long-Range Financial Plan, and the overall strategic vision of the village. So I will guarantee you that there will be future discussions about OASIS and continuing tweaks, because there should be, because it is a dynamic situation, it's a dynamic environment, and we're fortunate to have members of the Chamber of Commerce, the public, and the Economic Development Corporation continuing to participate with members of staff to give us the benefit of their views on how that resource can best be utilized to accomplish the goals of the Ogden Avenue Master Plan. So I see this as a very fluid process, and if we change things here and there, I think it would be irresponsible not to, because we need to be as nimble as the business customers we're trying to serve. Any other questions or comments from any members of the council with respect to the motion that's on the table? Commissioner Rankin.
And I also just wanted to clarify for everyone out there, the difference in the change we're talking about was the original proposal had said there would be no sign-only components approved unless it was part of a super project. And the change is that if you complete 2 components or more, then you could have a sign as part of your grant for the OASIS program. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead.
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin.
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin.
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell.
Aye.
Mayor Tully.
Aye. After all that, it's unanimously approved. That brings us to the end of our active agenda. Well, that's a good discussion. See, we're very transparent. That brings us to the end of our active agenda and brings us to item 8 on our agenda, our first reading, sort of our workshop segment of our meeting, where items are presented for discussion and for discussion purposes only and for action potentially at a later point in time. It's customary to turn over this portion of the meeting to our village manager. So, Mr. Fieldman, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. Only 2 items on tonight's first reading agenda. The first is consider a resolution authorizing an amendment to the PacUweb sales tax rebate agreement. This amendment would add 2 years of sales tax rebate payments to cover unexpected costs of pedestrian intersection improvements and delay caused by the state review and permitting process. No rebate payment would be made for year 1, which is 2011. This is consistent with the original expectations of the agreement was put in place last year, and we're happy to answer any questions that the council may.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Rankin?
Yeah, I neglected to ask this ahead of time. So we probably won't make the 12/31/12 deadline either, right? So they're probably going to forego.
They are trying very hard to make the 12/31/12 deadline.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, just for the record, I know that it'll be coming, but we do have support from the EDC regarding this issue.
Correct.
Thank you for sharing that. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Next item, please. 8B.
Is a consideration of an ordinance adopting 4-hour parking provisions on Elm Street, and here to present this item is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is an item that was recommended. This recommended item was brought forward as a petition from the residents on these blocks. It's on Elm Street, both sides of Elm Street between Prairie Avenue and Chicago. As a result of parking they were seeing occurring in this location all day, in some cases by commuters, in some cases we were told by residents from Downers Grove North High School students. We did a survey of the area and found that this particular block for some reason did not have parking restrictions as the blocks around it did. And we had a good discussion about this item at the Transportation and Parking Commission on July 11th. And there were several different approaches to it, and there seemed to be consensus by the residents and the TAP Commission for the recommended action, which is a 4-hour parking restriction on both sides of Elm Street between Prairie and Chicago. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments on this item from any members of the audience? We have one. Mr. LeCran, good evening.
Good evening. Tom LeCran, 545 Chicago Avenue. Every time one of these comes up, I have to get up and say something. It's great that we're being responsive to the residents there with direct response to their petition. That's a good idea. I still raise the question of enforcement. Do we have a plan in place? Who's going to enforce that particular parking restriction? Who, in fact, supports parking restrictions anywhere in town, other than computer parking lots. We have somebody that comes and checks those, puts it on the tires and stuff. Because as a previous council responded to me when I talked about people parking over the sidewalk, we had an ordinance that takes care of that, but no enforcement. And they said, we're waiting on you to call, which to me says, you're trying to turn this town into a bunch of snitches. We're going to snitch on each other. I have a problem with my own street, Chicago Avenue, which has a no parking restriction on the north side of the street. All kinds of people park right in front of the sign on that side of the street. You call the village, they don't have time. You can't, police are too busy to come and get it. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that the village starts to need to look at their enforcement policy. How are you going to do it before you actually pass something that requires it? If you're not going to enforce it, why put it out there? Thank you.
Just to clarify, these types of no parking restrictions are actively enforced during neighborhood patrols, and we will also respond to any complaints filed with the police department.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. LeCran. Thank you for that follow-up, Mr. Fieldman. Any questions? Any other questions or comments from the audience on this matter? Questions or comments from the council, Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, just 2 points. One is a question. The license plate recognition programming that we have installed in some of our cars, we utilize that, right, in these neighborhoods?
Yes, we do. It's primarily used, though, in the downtown
Correct.
area. On occasion, it's used for other applications.
But, I mean, we could use a point, going back to what Mr. LeCran
Yes.
said, I mean, we could swing a cart up and down the street to figure
Yes.
that out, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any, I know that we've talked about this a couple times since I've been up here, but are there any other areas that we need to address around the schools so we can tackle it all at once and not a piecemeal? And I don't mean any disrespect, I'm
No,
just
not at all.
wondering if that was something we could do.
Like you saw when we did our neighborhood traffic study, area number 1, about 2 years ago, we did comprehensively look at parking in that neighborhood. We will be doing that again in study area number 2, which does include 2 grade schools and a middle school, I believe. So we will be catching quite a few schools with that study. And that will give us the opportunity to look at that neighborhood as a neighborhood and with all the parking restrictions in it. As you know, a lot of the parking restrictions we have now were put in reaction to requests from neighbors, so it's kind of street by street. As we do these neighborhood traffic studies, that is something we will be looking at, as well as traffic regulations.
So it'll become more defined?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you. Just something that just occurred to me. You know, we keep coming up with these restrictions, and like water, the traffic goes. You know, they park where they want to park, and it just keeps spreading to the point where maybe the students will park so far away that they really don't want to walk that far to class. And that's a long way. And by putting a restriction on, you're also restricting the neighborhood. And I'm just wondering if there's any way maybe we can get into permits or stickers or something that allow, you know, maybe it's something we can look at, allowing people to park on their own block. You can park in front of your house, nobody else can unless, you know, don't they do that for the, like for instance, the Cub games, you know, type of thing where maybe it's something we can look at, maybe it's too expensive, too hard to enforce, but...
Then we're going to have picnic tables and lawn chairs on the
But you got to have your name on it with your address, because we don't want some student from Woodridge or something parking in that.
Oh, now we're going to get letters.
It's certainly a tool we can use, that we could use if we found it was the most effective. In this case, there was the option to have no parking during certain times in the morning, which we've done in some cases because of schools. In this case, the residents preferred the 4-hour limitation because it allows them to park in the morning if they want to for less than 4 hours or different times of the day. So it doesn't, they felt it was the most adaptable and usable for them. So I think we could look at different options, in which we do in each case.
Yeah, that would be difficult, but something I consider. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Schnell?
And I know we try to bend to the wishes of the residents in the neighborhood. And you said, you know, in some places we have restrictions because students, in this case, we're doing the 4-hour. Going to, I think what Mr. LeCren was saying, when you have streets that all have different kinds of restrictions, I think the enforcement becomes problematic. And that could be one of the reasons perhaps why streets are not enforced, because how do you, it's very difficult if one is 4 hours and the other one is, 9 to 2 or whatever the school hours are. Does it make more sense to try to have all of these restrictions, and this is just kind of asking, but does it make more sense from an enforcement point of view to try to have the restriction, at least in a neighborhood, consistent, so that if a car does come through, police car comes through, that at least they would know that a car that's parked there at 8 or 2 or whatever, it shouldn't be there, as opposed to trying to figure out, well, have they been here 4 hours, or are they here 4.5 hours? And I don't know the answer to that. I just know in all the years we've been doing this, I've heard that same comment from
I think the answer is yes. It's easier from an enforcement standpoint to make the same rules everywhere, and ones that if you're here during a certain hour, it's a ticket. If you're not, you don't have to time it. It becomes much easier. But we try to look at many things in the requests of the neighbors. So.
As we do the traffic plan, the traffic study for the neighborhood that has the schools and the junior high in it, is it possible to actually look at that kind of, I'm not trying to obviously dictate to a neighborhood what they should or should not do, but there's an engagement process during that plan, and it might be a good opportunity to actually talk to the neighborhood to see if indeed they're concerned about enforcement. This may be a way of saying, well, enforcement could be easier if. And again, it's just a way of, I guess, getting information for us too up here as to whether or not, what's more important, the flexibility or enforcement. I don't know what the answer to that is. But if perhaps during the traffic study that could be incorporated, and I think it might be advantageous for us to find out.
We can certainly have that discussion, and the police department is an active participant in that process as well.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
Anything further on this item? Thank you, Nan.
And that ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item 9 on our agenda tonight, the mayor's report, and I have a couple of items. The first one is to update everyone with respect to where we are at in our continuing mission to pursue and obtain enhanced reliability of our electrical service from ComEd. As those who have been following this know, last year, due to the extraordinary weather, we had some extraordinary outages which brought to the surface some long-standing chronic issues with respect to the reliability of electrical service in Downers Grove. Among other things, we held a town hall meeting with senior executives of Commonwealth Edison, in which the village presented a number of points that we insisted that they address, and we have achieved a decent amount of success with getting those items addressed by ComEd, but we understand that this is a continuing issue, and so we're continuing to stay on it, even though so far, knock on wood, we have not seen the kind of extreme weather events this season that we did at this time last year. But because this is continuing to be an item of high importance to our residents and our business community, we are going to be holding a second town hall meeting with executives of Commonwealth Edison, and this one will be held on September 20th. The details are continuing to be worked out for the town hall meeting, but the date is firm, September 20th, and that will be held at the Park District Recreation Center on Belmont Avenue here in Downers Grove. And we will, in conjunction with our staff, continue to work with ComEd regarding any areas where reliability of electricity service appears to still be a concern in the village. In particular, as a result of recent village efforts, ComEd has scheduled an additional tree trimming project for the area near 63rd and Main Street to address recent outages, although not on the scale that we saw last year. Just so everyone, again, can put in their calendars, the ComEd Town Hall meeting is scheduled for Thursday, September 20th, 2012, at the Park District Recreation Center located at Ogden Avenue in Belmont, or actually just south of there. This one is also specifically designed to include our business stakeholders so they too can share their voice directly with representatives of ComEd. So we would invite everyone to come out and participate in that as well. And I think, as was mentioned by some of my colleagues last time, if there are issues that we know of in advance, particularly from residents who raised them last year and haven't seen sufficient progress in their eyes towards enhancing or addressing those issues, please let us know, because we will make sure to include them in the package that we present to ComEd at that meeting. The next item I have is something that I know my colleagues and I always greatly appreciate, and that deals with the appointment and reappointment of members to boards and commissions here in the village of Downers Grove. We are fortunate to have one of the most engaged, informed, and involved communities, I would say, in the Chicago metropolitan area, and have the benefit of a tremendous amount of volunteers that give up their own time and don't even get to sit up here in fancy chairs like us, to really enhance and improve their community. And we greatly value their time and assistance, and even though we don't always necessarily agree with the recommendations of our boards and commissions, their input, expertise, and experience and dedication is greatly appreciated. We have a number of board and commission appointments and reappointments that are on the table tonight. There will be some more down the road. We couldn't get them all in tonight. We don't have to read through all of them. It's rather a long list as they were previously published. But I want to first thank all those that are currently serving who requested and volunteered to be reappointed. And we appreciate their continuing to serve on the various boards and commissions. But I also want to especially thank some brand new appointees who will be serving on boards and commissions in our village for the first time. And I'll apologize if I can't see where you're all sitting, but I know you're here. I want to welcome and introduce to the community, well, community already knows you, but maybe not in the walls of 801 Burlington. Justin Simmer, who will be, who's on the table tonight to be appointed to the the Environmental Concerns Commission, excuse me. I was looking at Mr. Cass and I was thrown off. Justin will be serving on the Environmental Concerns Commission, so we're looking forward to that. Don Renner will be serving on the Health and Human Services Commission, excuse me. I'm writing down acronyms here and falling victim to them. Jeff Jacobson is being appointed to the Liquor Commission, and Michael McCann to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we welcome each of you, assuming that everything goes forward as planned, and look forward to your service to the community. Greatly appreciate your willingness to do so, and we really appreciate the fact that you're still in the audience, notwithstanding the fact that you've been witnessing a village council meeting for the last hour and a half. That was the true test, the fact that you haven't gone out the back door. So thank you very much for that, and again, I know that I speak for all my colleagues when we say thank you very much for all your service, both in the past and going forward. So with that, I think we need a motion to appoint and reappoint members to village boards and commissions.
So moved.
Second.
And well, let me just add one thing. We will be doing some additional appointments at our next meeting with respect to the Plan Commission and also our Youth in Government program. We have 2 students, one at North and one at South, Commissioner Durkin, who will be being recommended for appointment to a couple of our boards and commissions. That's truly a program that's worked out just absolutely terrific, getting some of our high school kids involved in the village government process. I think we benefit far more from their participation than they do, quite frankly, although I've heard pretty consistently from all of them that they've really gotten a lot of value out of the program. And once again, we're going to have a couple of, I think, truly fantastic high school students here in Downers Grove that we'll be considering next week along with those Plan Commission appointments. So any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from any members of the Village Council? I didn't mean to monopolize everything, but are there any questions or comments? Hearing on roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Motion passed unanimously, and congratulations to our new appointees. You start work tomorrow at 9 a.m. Report to Just kidding. You'll be hearing from us with more details, but we all greatly appreciate your service. And that is the end of the mayor's report. That brings us to item 10 on our agenda, the manager's report, please.
Just one good news item to report tonight, Mayor and Council. As we call your attention to the screen, which will be a shot of our homepage on our website, I'm proud to announce that the Illinois chapter of the American Planning Association has named the Village of Downers Grove the winner of the Daniel Burnham Award for Excellence in a Comprehensive Plan. That is a statewide program. Obviously, all of us here know how much hard work and planning effort went into that document, and we are proud to receive that recognition from the Illinois APA. And that is our report.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Brings us to item 11, attorney's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Only one item to present this evening, and that is an ordinance adopting a 4-hour parking restriction on Elm Street between Prairie and Chicago.
Very good. Thank you. Brings us to item 12, council member reports and new business. Commissioner Barnett.
I have nothing, Mayor.
Commissioner Durkin.
I have no report.
Commissioner Schnell.
I have nothing.
Commissioner Waldeck.
I do have one item, Mayor. This is our last meeting for August. I'm going to ask you to mark your calendars for September 15th. Many of our residents, one of the impacts of our community is Argonne National Laboratories, and they're so big they have their own zip code. Every other year they have an open house, and they've kind of modified it this year. And I bring it up this time because they're going to have an open house, but this one is called an energy showcase. It's a little different than in previous years. This one is devoted to one topic. They plan on having different topics at different times. This one is devoted to energy. This event is free and open to the public. Advance registration is required as attendance will be limited. So to register, please visit www.regionline.com/energy/showcase. Now, if you don't want to hit the rewind on your recording devices, I just go to www.anl.gov. That's Argonne National Labs, anl.gov. The Energy Showcase will feature interactive demos, exhibits, tours, and is a great opportunity to learn more about Argonne's research and talk with the lab's leading experts. It's a fabulous event. I went to the one they had a couple years ago. My nephew went and picked up some material and information and won a science award for his project. So it's not only fun for the whole family, but with schools starting up, maybe some of the teachers might be interested in getting classes together and head out there. Our Department of Energy is, and Argonne Labs is just crucial to research in such an important topic as energy. So get out there if you can, but remember it's advanced registration. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin.
Yes, I had an opportunity to participate in fire training last Wednesday. I wanted to specifically thank Deputy Chief Jeff Pendolsky, Battalion Chief Matt Byer, and Training Safety Battalion Chief Matt Daly. I learned a lot about what firefighters experience on the job, the heavy and hot uniforms, the inability to see through smoke, having to crawl on your hands and knees through a house. I thought I was in good shape, and I was pretty wiped out after that, and the physical exertion involved in fighting fires. It was truly eye-opening, and I won't forget it. This is a prime example of how you learn more by participating in something than you would ever learn from a report. So thank you to them. It was a great experience.
Thank you for doing that, and thank you to our fire service for returning you to us unscathed. Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to remind everyone that school is starting. I believe the parochial schools have started this week, and District 58 schools start next week. So as we modify parking restrictions in the neighborhoods, also be aware of students walking to and from, and of course the first couple of days of school, the traffic around the school buildings will be heavy for sure. So keep an eye out for people and cars around schools. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Well said, Commissioner. And for my accord, first of all, I just want to thank the Illinois State Treasurer Dan Rutherford for being our very special guest at Coffee with the Council this past Saturday. He and his iCash team were a fixture at the downtown farmers market, and it was really good turnout. I want to thank everyone who came down to meet the treasurer. He was his typical magnanimous self, and we appreciated him coming down and being our special guest, and for everyone in the village that came down. And I think some of us, even in this room, found that they had some money they weren't aware that they had coming to them, so it actually paid to come down to see us. Second, to the extent that you need to get back in shape, there are two organizations in Downers Grove that are hosting 5K races between now and our next meeting. The first one would be St. Mary of Gostin's 5K and 1 mile youth run, which is on Saturday, August 25th, 8 o'clock in the morning. That's always a nice race. I hopefully participate in that one. So you might see me as you pass me in the race. And then since we will not meet until after Labor Day, I would be remiss, and Commissioner Durkin would never let me forget it if I didn't mention that the Downers Grove Lions Club is hosting their 4th annual Labor of Love 5K race and walk on Labor Day, 8 o'clock in the morning. And there's no better way to begin your holiday than with a 5K race. And this St. Mary's race is down by the church, and the Lions race begins and ends over by McCullum Park.
Freshly paved streets.
Yes, and that's my favorite one because the finish line is actually about 50 yards away from the fire station, so just in case. I know that the paramedics are there to take care of anything that might happen. I obviously want to wish everyone a happy and safe Labor Day, but just want to end on a more solemn note. I'm sure everyone is aware at this point in time that DuPage County recently lost one of its iconic leaders. Lombard President Bill Mueller sadly passed away and left us too early at the age of 76 very recently due to complications from contracting West Nile virus. Over the last 10 years, I know myself and a number of my colleagues have had the privilege of working with President Mueller on various aspects of municipal government in DuPage County and beyond, have been on trips down to Springfield to lobby in support of municipal interests affecting all of our communities, and have interacted with him through organizations such as the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, the Illinois Municipal League, and DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference. Bill Mueller was truly a great asset to Lombard. He will be sorely missed both there and in DuPage County. He really loved his community. He was one of the only guy that actually drove around with license plates that said Lombard. And I had the good fortune of actually talking with him about all things Downers Grove in our downtown just days before he fell ill. So he will be sorely missed, and I know both Lombard and DuPage County have lost one of its iconic leaders. So we keep him and his family and our neighbors in Lombard in our prayers. And with that, we need to adjourn, so may I please have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Chanel?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Thank you very much. Good night. We are adjourned.